Hello. Great to see you. I'm going to see how I can chat here. All right. I think I've got it. Thanks for being here, joining me here in Leipzig. Send me a comment here if you're with me live, and that way I know I can interact with you and get your questions and comments. I'll start it off. Wonderful to see you here for this first installment of Bach on the Road. And in case that idea sounds pretty weird to you, here's what we're doing. We're pretending that Bach, instead of hiding these amazing compositions, decided that he would actually tour around with them. Bach's sons wrote that he played violin very well, but obviously we don't have a whole lot of eyewitness accounts, no recordings or anything like that. We certainly don't know about him touring around as a violinist, but we're going to pretend he did a world tour with the sonatas and partitas. And so every day, every one of these sessions, Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 2 Pacific, we're going to find ourselves in a different location and go over different sonatas and partitas. So this week is all about the very first sonata, the G minor, and I'm really thrilled that you're here with me. So I'm going to keep an eye on the chat, on the questions. It's just me here in this Thomas Kirche here in Leipzig. That's the church where Bach spent so many years as an employee, basically, organist and Kapellmeister. But it's just me, so I'm going to keep my eye on the questions and all of that. If I miss yours, I apologize. We'll see if we can't recruit Akiko for some of these tour stops to help us with the questions. But I'm seeing hellos from so many places, and I love it. Thank you so much. I love seeing where you're from, and I'm just going to see if I might be able to get us going on YouTube too. I'm not looking if you're able to watch me live on YouTube. I'm thrilled to see you there too. I'm only monitoring the comments and questions on Facebook though at the moment, so that's just an FYI. All right. So, before we get started, obviously there are so many different ways, so many different styles in which to play Bach, and I don't have any particular agenda to push here, and I think one of the reasons that this music has endured so amazingly and for so long is that it is so flexible. You can play it with no vibrato. You can play it on the original instruments and setup and bows on which it was written, and sometimes that's actually easier, as we'll see when we get to a lot of the things with chords. You can play it on completely modern instruments, modern setups. This is an old instrument, but with basically a modern setup. I've got, for those interested, I do use the Pirastro Passion strings for the G, D, and A. Those are gut strings with metal winding, of course, so they're not the pure gut strings. I use a Hill E, a heavy gauge. So it's mostly a modern setup on an old instrument. And, I like to play Bach with the same kind of expression, the same kind of outlook that I like to bring to all the rest of the music that I play. It doesn't mean that I'll play it in exactly the same way, but I do use vibrato. It's part of my sound. It's part of my expression. I'll use somewhat less in Bach than I would for music from later periods, of course. And I just look to bring out the melody when the melody is the important thing. Always the harmony, always the bass. The bass is never not important. And we'll see that in so many of the movements, especially the ones that create that illusion of multiple voices going on at once, especially those fugues. Boy, the fugues. I've gone many rounds with these fugues. And just since I'm seeing a question from Susan, for example, I'm sure many of you may have the same one, as far as what edition I use, you know, like a lot of people my age, I had that international edition that was edited by Ivan Galamian, and that was valuable not only for the good bowing and fingering suggestions from Galamian, but for the fact that it had the facsimile of the manuscript in the back. So you could always go to the back and see, well, what's really in there? Even though there are questions, did Bach himself write that manuscript? Was it his wife? Even the manuscript is argued about a little bit. But so I learned from that international edition. Now I like to have something that's fairly clean. You can find an urtext basically on IMSLP for free. You can get the Baronreiter edition. That's pretty moderately priced too, and that way you can play from the same bowings or lack of bowings that are in the manuscript. So in more recent years, I've gone more to the unedited versions, but still a lot of the things that I learned from that international edition probably stick with me. So some old habits die hard. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. The G minor is the first in the set. We don't totally know for sure in which order he wrote them, and as you may know, this music wasn't even published until after 1800. Bach died in 1750, so nobody was playing this stuff. Mendelssohn gets some credit for reviving so much of Bach's music. Joseph Joachim is probably the first really well-known performer, virtuoso, to regularly play these in public. Schumann looked at this music and thought it would make a fine set of pieces for violin and piano, so he wrote some piano accompaniment for them. But until Joachim, nobody was out there really performing this for people, partly because it looked so difficult, and in some cases almost impossible to play. Oh, Zach's here, an old friend, great to see you, and a quote from one of our mentors and teachers, Joseph Silverstein: "Keep the back manuscript and trash the rest," referring to the international edition. So yeah, I have many international editions gathering dust in my closet somewhere. So let's start with the first movement. My plan for today is to look at the first movement and to get a start on the last movement as well. And then on Wednesday, if you're able to join for that, we're going to look at the third movement, a beautiful Siciliano, and then work some more on the last movement with some more practice strategies, how to get that up to speed, perhaps even how to memorize it. And then finally, Friday's session, same time, same channel, save that for the fugue. That deserves a session of its own for sure. So here's how we begin. I'll play some of the movement. I won't play the whole thing to start out. All right, well, what do you know? I played the whole thing. I got halfway through and I figured it's not that long a movement, so why not play it? Now, I do wish I had some of the ring from this beautiful cathedral here. I think we all know it's my garage, and I've got a little microphone about 2 inches away from the violin, so we get what we get. Someday I would be amazing to play this piece in this church. For now, we've got to imagine as we have to imagine so many things these days. That's why I'm especially glad to see you here with me. Now, first of all, I saw my mom and dad in the audience, so thank you for saying hi. Wish I could be there watching from Kentucky. I wish I could be there with them. Maybe Bach will make a tour stop in Kentucky before he's done. Before I get to some questions, I'm hearing from a couple of you that you were trying to see this on YouTube and that wasn't working. Let me take just one moment to see if there's anything I can do about getting that stream going, and if not, I won't take too much time here with that. Yeah, it just says waiting for Nathan Cole. Well, that is too bad. If anybody came from YouTube, let me know what you saw. Send me a message. But all right, I will continue with you guys who are here with me on Facebook Live. Wonderful. So the typical order, Peter asks, typical order that people learn these pieces. You know, this is the first one of the Bachs that, actually, no, that's not true. That's not true. I believe that I learned the E major partita first, which is actually the last in the set, and I think I didn't finish this comment from before. The order is partly taken from a colleague and a scholar of Bach's works who, I guess, put down in a notebook or a catalog these 6 pieces in this order. Maybe there was some artistic license for that, you know, trying to alternate sonatas and partitas, but in any case, we haven't really messed with the order that he set down in that catalog, and I'm blanking on his name right now, but that's how that order was set. But it's not an order of difficulty or anything like that. So I believe that I learned the last in the set first, the E major partita, partly because it's first movement, that great preludio. It's a great standalone piece, you know, and I'm sure that my teacher, Dan Mason, had it in mind that would be something to get in my fingers when I was young. As well, there aren't a whole boatload of double stops in that one. I mean, there's a minuet movement. We're getting away from the G minor, but that's fine. These all tie together. I said minuet, I meant gavotte. And I also, in my intro video to this, I said that Bach was born in Bonn, which of course was Beethoven. And many of you were kind enough to point that out to me. And I mean that seriously. I like you guys pointing out when I mess up. So that E major partita doesn't have a whole ton of double stops, which obviously this G minor does, especially in the fugue. And so I think Mr. Mason saw that as a sort of gradual on-ramp, because if you stick somebody right away with this G minor, this first movement can actually be extremely difficult to count. I don't know if any of you guys had that experience either as a grown-up or as a kid trying to learn this, and just to figure out where all the eighth notes went. And let's see, some great questions. All right, I'm going to get to as many of these as I can. First of all, yes, this instrument is a Strad, and it would be fun to say that it had some, you know, connection to Bach or Germany particularly, but this is the Jack Benny Stradivarius. So if you don't know who Jack Benny is, you can head on over to YouTube after this is done. He was for a while one of the most popular entertainers, one of the most famous people in the world, mid-20th century, American comedian, owned this instrument, and this instrument I don't own. It's owned by my orchestra, the LA Phil. And so part of his shtick was playing really badly. And I always feel like that spirit is in here somewhere waiting to jump out and attack me right in the middle of a performance. Also, I should say, in the middle of that movement, I always have a heart attack, because one time I was performing that movement in recital, and I know the exact spot where I couldn't remember what came next, and I had to stop and go back to the beginning. So I always try to avoid that when I play this subsequently. So the year on this instrument, I should say 1729, so it was around when these pieces were written, but I'm sure it had to wait a while ever to play Bach solo sonatas and partitas for the first time, since they weren't published until after 1800. As far as the shoulder rest, that's always a question I get. So just in case you didn't see, this is just a piece of leather. It's deer leather, I believe, from a company called Breton's Village. They have a website, and they'll ship you scrap leather. This was. It's kind of rough on this side, and so I put that side against my clothing so it doesn't slide around too much. Then the instrument, it just prevents the instrument from sliding mostly side to side. If I don't have that, then it's very easy for the instrument to kind of slide side to side. There's no real artistic reason for doing this. I used the shoulder rest until about 5-6 years ago, my whole life. Eventually I just found it something extra, and the main difference, just briefly, that's not what this session is about particularly, but the main difference when you play without a shoulder rest, you must support the instrument almost all the time with the left arm, the left hand. That seems like it would take away from freedom. Paradoxically, it can do the opposite. It can make your hand feel more free, but it really depends on your setup. If you try to play without a rest, you may initially find that you're always looking to clamp down with your head. That's not going to work. You're going to get neck pain, jaw pain, eventually worse stuff. So you must find that way to support with the left hand. So I like what it did for my vibrato. I like how it feels and all that, but there's no real reason of sound for me to do it. This bow, by the way, is a Charles Picot. It's one of those picture bows, which you won't be able to see here, but if I point it toward the light, there is a lens embedded in here, and if I look through that into a strong light source like I'm doing now, there's a tiny, tiny piece of film in there. The lens magnifies it, and it's J.B. Viome, and it's got his name below it. So as far as the next question was about rolling the chords, and that gets us really into the heart of how to perform this music. As I said, I really always want to hear the bass very prominently. And the reason for that is that it sets the whole sonority. Right? With very few exceptions, actually, I don't make any exceptions. There's no chord in Bach that I roll the other way, especially not if the strings are tuned that way. I roll them from the bass up always. In some cases, I'll play 3 or more notes simultaneously. But of course, the character of this Adagio, I'm not going to be trying to play 4 notes at once. I generally want to get 2 notes sounding on the bottom, and that's my go-to technique for all of solo Bach. Nothing too fancy. You can get extraordinary variety just by how quickly you roll to the top, whether it's going to be the D and A strings, the A and E, or even a single note. There's all kinds of variety there. Just because you think of it as 2 and 2 or 2 and 1, it doesn't mean that it's always going to come out in a very cookie cutter way. So you can do slowly, quicker, but it will still sound in character as long as you're not accenting your arrival on the top notes. If I do that, then that jumps out as being out of character. And it's possible to accent even if you roll slowly. So that's really the thing to avoid. We're going to save that for music with a different character. But I'm just thinking 2 and 2, and there's always going to be a moment which you can feel if you rock the bow back and forth on the strings. There's always going to be a moment, at least, where you're on a single string. Even if I say 2 and 2, I'm going to be on that D string for just a second. I just want that moment to be very, very small, very short. Then there's a question of, which notes do you hang on to, which do you not? All throughout these sonatas and partitas, Bach writes things that are impossible on the violin. A whole note with 4 notes. Well, we know that unless we kind of multi-track or do this special, I don't know if you guys have seen those videos where someone loosens the bow and rethreads it on the other side so that the stick is under the strings and the hair is on top, and then they can play 4 strings at once. If we're not doing that, we're not holding 4 notes for a bar, right? So we've always got to make, you can call them choices, you can call them compromises. I'm going to let the top note, the melody note, sound by itself just for a moment before I move on. Like that. And here, it's not the top note, is it? That's the important line. It's the middle voice. So I'm going to let that sound for a moment before going on. Same here. On that chord, some people like to let only the A string sound at the end because that's the end of the melody. I like to let both the A and the E strings sound because that G is the resolution of the F sharp. So I find them equally important. So just once more that opening line. Last thing I want to say before I check some more of your comments and questions, one of the challenges in so much of solo Bach is when you're on the top strings and getting back to those bottom strings. It helps if you have a really great grounding in just string levels in general. But briefly, right, we've got 4 basic string levels. And I like this whole apparatus, everything from the fingers all the way to the elbow. I like this to look the same no matter what string I'm on. So whether I'm on G, D, A, or E, nothing changes about that. Now you may notice in yourself, or if you're watching someone else playing, you may notice a good position here on the E string, maybe even the A, and then you may find that as you go to the D, the hand moves up there, the arm kind of lags behind, G string, the arm's lagging way behind. I'm exaggerating it here. But you may notice that you do some of that yourself. That can make Bach very tricky because you'll be here and then you're asking your hand basically to make a big change over to another string. Chances are that you're going to have some kind of a crunch. It's going to be very difficult for you to maintain similar pressure on the different strings. Whereas if you keep all this the same and let your upper arm do the work, it's very easy. And so it's getting your arm to the right level and then getting your arm to the right level at the right time, which usually means a split second before you need the note to sound. So here in this line, This is the kind of the first time we've got to go from A to the G and D. So I mentioned that we had 4 string levels. You might even want to say 7, because we've got the 4 single strings and we've got the 3 double strings, right? If you want to master solo Bach, you got to be familiar with those 3 as well. Easy to feel where they are, but it's worth remembering that I'm not going to the G string, right? I'm going to the GD level. It's bugging me, I'm sorry. It's this drafty cathedral that's doing it to me. And Heifetz would not have been happy with me. He would not have allowed me to tune in the middle of a lesson or performance. So, and you see how the arm has to move in advance. That's one of the key things rolling these chords. There I picked my bow up off the string, and when you do that, you're inviting trouble because it's got to land somehow, right? I'd prefer to keep it on. At the very worst, you can hear a little of the rocking noise, but nobody beyond, 2 inches, 3 inches, 4 feet is going to hear that. Being able to do that, whether it's at the tip or the frog, is key if you want it all smooth. It's a lot of talk, I know, and I'm going to miss some of your questions, I'm certain, but I will. And Johanna, this is a good question. You're asking about the rhythm, basically, the freedom of the rhythm, and that's something that everybody has to reckon with when they play this music. And I saw a question further back, and I apologize, I forget who asked it, but why did Bach write 16th notes and 32nds and 64th notes? Couldn't he just have written all with longer note values? I don't have a great answer for that question, and it certainly does make it difficult to learn the rhythms if you're not used to seeing all of those. Most of us at some point in our lives have to get out pencil, right? Pencil and eraser, and mark in where the quarter notes go, maybe even the 8th notes. And then the problem is, you figure out where all the 8th notes go and you've got it all locked in, and then you start playing this with a lot of beats in your head, right? I exaggerate, but it's very easy to get sucked into that once you've figured out all the 8th notes. Eventually you want it to feel at least in 4. And then, should it be metronomic? Should it be totally free? I mean, I've heard players who play a lot of, let's say, Eastern European folk music, sometimes called gypsy music. I've heard players who identify as that style play this music brilliantly, and it's very free. It's not quite the way I feel it, so I can't. I've never been successful at really. But there are valid musical reasons to think of it that way. I think what makes that successful is if you're really leading people clearly from checkpoint to checkpoint harmonically. We've got, and I don't have the world's strongest harmony and counterpoint background, so this won't be any kind of harmonic analysis, but it's very easy for anybody to hear. We've got 4 chords, right? So the more freedom you take with the rhythm, the clearer you have to be about which chords are more important than others, right? And you should be clear on that even if you're playing the rhythm more or less as written, but that starts us out. I would play this a little stronger. Got an unstable interval here for the fourth. Tritone, strongest of all. Resolution, a little bit weaker, a little bit more passive. So you could do that with metronomic rhythm, as long as you're giving direction with the bow. Right, I didn't just play all the notes the same dynamic. There's a little crescendo, there's direction, and there's bow distribution, right? I use more than half of the bow for the first note because this is weaker. Direction. Hang on to that a little stronger. So that's more or less straight rhythm. From there you can take as much freedom as you like, as long as you don't lose sight of the harmony, taking people where you want to lead them. Now, Lisa mentions the Baroque bow, and then I want to get to tuning as well. Bill asks about that. So Baroque bows, I've tried. I don't have a lot of experience playing them, but you know what we're talking about, right? I mean, truly a Baroque bow is like the bow and arrow bow, right? It's curved the other way, and it's so different. There are also more transitional bows that blend elements of that. What you'll find when you play those, there's no sustaining a full bow with the same sound. You can't be up here at the tip with a whole lot of power. It just doesn't, it's not built to do that. You have power and articulation here at the frog and in the lower half of the bow, and then the rest of it is just for air. It's to keep the ring going, but not to keep adding energy into the stroke. For that reason, if you're using a bow like that, it's simply not possible to and to connect G, F, and to grow through that, you know, it would have to resemble something more like. So maybe it's no surprise that that phrasing works, basically. There's really no playing off the string with a bow like that. So, you know, in that little snippet of the E major preludio we did before, that's right out. You can't do that. The bow just won't bounce like that. So, you know, it would be on the string. However, it would have a natural lightness to it because you simply, there wouldn't be that strength in the middle of the bow with a Baroque bow. So you'd be playing on, but it would naturally sound like you wouldn't have to work for the lightness. Something like that. So my feeling on all that is we've got the equipment we've got. Here I'm playing in a garage, but let's say I actually was in a bigger space. You know, let's fill that space with sound using the instruments we have, using the bows we have. Yeah, I don't love to really hang on to the bitter end of most of these long notes. I think some of them do benefit from me hanging on, sustaining more, giving more the illusion of an organ. You know, when Bach writes those big glorious chords that you can't really play on the violin, you know, on modern instruments we can get a little bit closer to sustaining some of those. We'll see that in the fugue later on too. The question about tuning, and then I see a great one from Roy as well about choices we have to make about what notes go on the beat and which don't. Tuning, it has to sound pleasing to the ear. You know, that sounds like a cop-out answer, but you know, there's no strict system that I adhere to. Has to sound pleasing to my ear and to the listener's ear. And we've got the usual conflict, right, is between vertical tuning, meaning if I've got a chord, that chord has to sound in tune with itself, and horizontal or melodic tuning, meaning that a melody must sound good on its own. And sometimes it's impossible to totally reconcile those two, and we'll have to make a choice or a compromise, you could call it. But just to take, I wonder if we can get away from the first line. Let's go on. So, right here, I'm putting this flat very close to the A. I'm putting the E flat very close to the D. To me, you could call it expressive intonation. To me, it's pleasing. And I've got no other notes going along with these. Not in chords and not in a short space of time. For example, let's say it were a faster movement and I had something like, there are no chords, yeah, but I've got a ton of E flats right next to each other. I can't put one different than another. It's going to stick out, right? There would be no reason to do that anyway, but you know what I mean. Whether it's in a chord or whether it's in a short space of time, you could call that vertical tuning. Here I don't have to deal with that. Here, I've got a perfect fourth. I cannot compromise on that. Let's say I wanted a super low. Remember how I had the B flat low a second ago? I can keep it there, but now I have to put the F low to match it. I can't, the perfect interval can't be out of tune. Sounds terrible. What does that F sound like on its own? Sounds pretty low. Maybe that's acceptable in the context. Doesn't really bother me. Another solution is to make the B flats a little bit higher. Then this is kind of bothering me, right? Maybe there's a meeting in the middle. Those are the kind of choices that I know you were asking about, Roy, and the kind of choices that once you really get into this music, you have to make. You can't shy away from them. You can get very close just playing all the notes as they would occur on the keyboard. You can get really close. It's going to sound pretty good that way, and then you can fine-tune from there. Actually, Roy, that wasn't your question about tuning. Your question was about notes on the beat, which is another great one. Two-note chord, easy, I can play them both at once, but what about here? Do I think of that as an upbeat to the, and putting the melody on the beat, or now this, and if Zach's still here, he may have been at the same masterclass given by Joseph Silverstein, former concertmaster of the Boston Symphony, and a great player of Bach. His answer was simple. Bass always goes on the beat. And maybe that class just made a really strong impression on me. Well, I know it did, but ever since then, I haven't found a better solution than that. Just always putting the bass on the beat, letting the melody roll either almost immediately from there or with as much timing after as I like, but always having the bass on the beat. His demonstration of that was, imagine you're playing in a string quartet and the cellist is always beating you to the beat. And I have to admit, it can be pretty jarring, especially, we'll get there eventually, but in the A minor sonata, we've got a whole movement. Ooh, my hand wanted to get sharp there. We've got a heartbeat going in the bass, right? So when we've got a 3-note chord, it doesn't make sense to anticipate. I've got to keep the same rhythm. Yeah. And the melody's going to have to adapt to that. I take the same general attitude. So in the spot where we were here in the G minor, the D on the beat, because then I've got it's that much easier, I believe, to lead your listeners to keep that in their ear, and then until the... So it's a compromise. It's always going to be. We're not playing the organ. That would be fun to learn someday. I do try my hand at it sometime when nobody's looking in Disney Hall. Usually the second the real organists leave, they make sure to turn everything off, but sometimes before they do, I can sneak in maybe even a couple pedal notes. That's super fun. Those are really the main challenges in this. To lead the listener melodically, that's easier for most of us to get our minds around, to get our fingers around. It has mostly to do with bow distribution and the connections between the bows. And then to lead your listeners harmonically. That's a little bit more difficult. What I suggest is to take your music and to basically mark every chord change. And you don't have to do the chord symbols or anything, just mark where they are. And you can assign some level of importance to each one. You could use a really simple system. You 1, 2, and 3. 2 is a middle of the road. It's an arrival, but it's not something you're going to emphasize. 1 is more passive. And 3 is lots of tension, or it's a big arrival moment. You could do 5, 1 to 5, or whatever it is. Keep it simple, because even if you're just using, let's say, 1, 2, and 3, you may think you're making these differences, or you may think that, that's too obvious. I need a lot more colors than 3 colors. You're going to have more colors, but if you can succeed in really pulling off strong arrivals, middle of the road arrivals, and more passive chords, you're going to be way ahead of most people playing this music. And then from there, if you want to, fill it in with more shades of gray, you're always welcome to do that. Great. Let me look and see if there are any last questions about this, and then I want to get a start on the last movement of this. Noah, you have a question about the fugue. Let's answer that, even though Friday's session will be totally on the fugue. But just as a preview, do I try to keep the same bowing, the same throughout the movement? Or is it more important to keep the same articulation, or do you like it to evolve? So in the fugues, right, we always have a fugue subject. The subject of the G minor fugue is the simplest of all. and that's it. So to answer your question, I do like to keep the articulation basically the same. The bowing, as anybody knows who has played that movement, there are a lot of places where it's tempting or convenient to hook, especially when there are double stops. As you'll see, I don't like to hook as much as some people, but I'll do it sometimes if I need to. It's more important to me that the articulation stays more consistent. So when I hook, I don't want to play the separate version like, and the hook like, right? I want them more similar. So, or hooked. However, later in this G minor fugue, for example, it gets much grander, more tension. There are chords. There I might play everything a longer. Etc. And Friday will be a really fun day for that. And we won't be in Leipzig anymore either. Good. Let's get a start on the last movement. And we'll do more on that Wednesday. Same time, same channel here. The last movement is one of the, each of the three sonatas has a last movement that's more or less a kind of moto perpetuo with sixteenths. And so a lot of the same practice strategies can apply to all of them. We'll get more into the practice strategies for it in the next session on Wednesday. But I'll play the first half of it now. I really appreciate your comments and then your eyes and ears here too. It's a lot of fun for me, especially during this difficult time, and I so appreciate every one of you. And then there's a repeat for the bold, and a second half also with its own repeat. I kind of compromise. I feel like I've said the word compromise 20 times in this session already. I do the first repeat usually and not the second. I don't know why. The last recital I played this piece. Actually, I did neither repeat because it was a very demanding program physically. And I just, I thought, every little bit of energy I can conserve, I'm going to do it. And actually, in my head, I had this plan. I thought, if anything goes wrong, then I'm going to repeat it so that I can play it once right. But if the first time through is okay, then I'm going to go on. And so that's what I did. Now, this is a fast movement. I mean, it's marked fast, and I think there's nothing wrong with treating these fast Bach movements as virtuosic showpieces in a sense. I think there's a limit. You don't want them to sound silly. But I don't think that we have to say, this is Bach. I'm here in this church it's kind of intimidating with his face, right, looking down over me. I don't think we have to say, Bach, serious, we can't show off, we can't play brilliantly. He clearly, that E major preludio I keep referring to, he himself arranged that for like organ, but it's a brilliant and celebratory arrangement for big forces, and it's really, really fun to listen to. So you can't tell me that he wrote that and thought, must be you know, very serious. It's not. It's and you know, this is in a minor key, but it can still be fun and show off. Now, one of the things about getting a fast movement like this smooth. Oh, and I see another old friend. I've seen many old friends. It happens when I look over. So hi, Pavel. Great to see you here. Another schoolmate. A lot of times you might assume that an issue of smoothness or evenness is in the right hand because, you know, the bow is moving fast, there are string crossings and all that, and those do have their challenges. But a lot of times it's about the left hand not quite being ready. So something like that, I'll often see people play, you know, every finger goes down only when it's needed, every finger lifts up as soon as it's done. It's possible to play it that way. But it's pretty hard to play it fast that way, and it's pretty hard to play it smoothly that way. It's probably obvious to everyone that you'd want to leave your second finger down for those first three notes, but also for the next three, right? Not only that, but it's worth getting that 3 over early and getting the 1 down early. 3 over early, 2 over early. So this is a perfect example of what Galamian called the difference between musical timing and technical timing. All right, the musical timing is set. We're probably, I'm not sure I've ever heard anyone take a ton of rubato in this opening, so our rhythm is going to be steady. But the technical timing, when the fingers move, does not match up with that in the way that I'm doing. Right, as soon as that 3 can get over, it's over. There, I touched the string. And, you know, since I found about 6 examples of that in the first 2 bars, you can bet that there are, you know, hundreds of examples in the entire movement. So this is something that you can start building. You can build those habits in your scales, right? To get first fingers over early. To get fourth fingers over, or at least ready early. That's for the left hand. Leaving fingers down, having them ready in advance. For the right arm, the right hand, it's about choosing the string level that you want to be on and knowing when to move to the next one. Remember how we talked about there are not just 4 string levels, but 7? Even though this movement doesn't have, well, it's got like 2 double stops. Or the rest is not double stops, of course. Even though it doesn't have those double stops, I'm still going to be making use of the in-between string levels. That's because I don't want to be moving my arm for every single string change. If I'm between 2 strings, I'm going to have my arm at that in-between level, and I'm going to move between 2 strings with the hand. You can do that with the hand, between 2 strings. So this whole opening, now right about here, somewhere around there, I'm going to go to that in-between level. And then this in-between level. And finally, one smooth move from bottom to top. So basically I've got, yeah. And you can see pretty clearly the 3 moves. Boom, so starting, 1, 2, 3. If I were trying to cross for every string crossing, I'd be dead in the water. I could never get it smooth. So those are the two ways, if you're looking at playing this over the next couple days, over the course of this week, those are the two things you can be thinking of, even when you're playing it slowly, to prepare the way for an eventual fast and smooth performance of this. And we'll get much more into practice techniques for this movement next time. So I really hope you can, and I will get to a couple last questions here. Really hope you can join me Wednesday and Friday also. And share this with your friends too. Let's get more people joining the road trip as long as we're stuck inside. We'll jump to a new location. Bach's starting at home here, but he's going to get bolder. He's eventually going to get all the way around the world by the time we're done. So tune in to see where we'll be next. It's Wednesday, same time, 2 Pacific. Friday, same time, 2 Pacific. And who knows, maybe I can get the YouTube stream working as well, even though I'll be here with you guys for questions and comments. And let me see. As far as Paula, hi Paula, you got a question about rushing. Well, one solution is just to play it really fast, and then it's not possible to play it any faster. And that's how you not rush. I think some of the same kind of thinking that we had from the first movement, as far as leading the listener harmonically, that really helps. If you're only thinking of it as a barrage of 16th notes, it is easy to let it run downhill. But we've got one chord, and then, so if I can group those in my mind, it helps put things in packages a little bit. And then there are natural phrases, almost in a spoken sense. Just how when we speak sentences, there are natural points of rest. So whether I actually take time or don't take time, mentally those phrasings are there, and I think that's the single biggest help. And Herman, you have a question about squeezing the left hand too hard. I've got a great YouTube video, well, I think it's great, a YouTube video called MVP, Finding Your MVP, Minimum Violin Pressure. That's got a great exercise about just what you're talking about. Yeah, because extra left hand tension will just kill you physically in this movement. The exercise is basically about playing loud with the bow, but starting with literally harmonics pressure in the left hand. And that's very difficult for some people to do. Difficult for me sometimes too. Yeah. Sounds very ugly, I know. If you put it in an exercise, it can really break the association between the two hands of, loud bow means I've got a grip. So try that video, Herman. And Roy is a great question. I meant to find the exact answer for you. Why is this in G minor, but there's only one flat? And my harmony teacher explained it to me really well in school, and now I totally forget. I'm sure that some of you have the answers. I remember the word plagal somewhere in my memory. There was a reason. It's either about plagals or modes or something, but it explains why in the manuscript certain notes actually don't have flats. Like a lot of E flats are not flatted, but they're still played that way. So I'm sorry, I'm not the best person to answer that question, but there is an answer. Great. Last questions. These are good ones. And different rosin giving different sounds. You mentioned leatherwood rosin. I use leatherwood rosin. I really love it. It is kind of expensive, but rosins last forever. So maybe I was suckered in. I wanted to own the world's most expensive rosin. But I do like, it doesn't throw off a ton of dust. I use the, what do they have? The supple, at least when I bought it, they had a supple mixture and what was the other one? Anyway, I got the supple. feels nice. It doesn't seem scratchy, doesn't throw off a whole lot of dust, so I definitely recommend it. Leatherwood rosin. Mo, you ask about the first note. I'm pretty sure you're talking about the last movement. Yeah, I think I generally do that. I've gone back and forth. Sometimes I just want to come right out of the gate. I think either one can be effective depending on how much rubato you generally take in this music. Maury, hi Maury. You ask about first position as much as possible. Yeah, and part of that, for a long time, people didn't really make use of the higher positions on the violin very much. I think if it sounds better to go up into high positions, then, absolutely you can do it. But generally, lower positions, the strings are longer, they ring more, what we'd call a more open sound. Yes, it sometimes means that there are more string crossings. I would prefer to work on the string crossings and get those sounding really good. But to stay in lower positions, yes, that's a great question. However, I will shift if it sounds better to do that way. Linda, earlier in the session I talked about different editions, so if you want to watch the replay for that, yes. Oh, Christine, that's a good comment about Bach and his friends having never seen anything move faster than a horse, so to keep the tempo on a human scale. Yeah, that's a great point. Well, great. I'm so happy to have spent this time with you guys, and I look forward to many more. So come back Wednesday, same time, and stay safe, stay healthy, and can't wait to play some more Bach with you soon. So come back for Bach on the road. Bye.